Hello, everyone. Good to see everybody. I see some familiar faces here. Um, just wanted to go ahead and just make sure everybody's getting here into the room. All right. Well, let me go ahead and get started. I know some of you know me and others don't. And I want to just take a few moments to introduce you to our Civic Dialogue series today, which we are thrilled to continue. And this is actually a first for us. Normally we meet on Fridays, but we had the opportunity, particularly because we are heading to the midterm elections very soon, to have Nancy Thomas join us today. And again, this is a real honor. But before we get started, I just want to remind folks to please put your names in the chat and then also your college. So that way we know which college you are attending from. And also, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. We are happy to welcome many new and returning attendees. As many of you know, I'm Patty Robinson. I'm the Faculty Director of Civic Engagement and here at College of the Canyons. And I'm joined by Kimberly Rosenfeld, Chair of the Education Department and Chair of Women and Gender Studies at Cerritos College, and also Keelan Koenig from 3CSN. Which is our California Community College Success Network group, which has provided an immense amount of support for all the work that we're doing with Civic Dialogues. For many of you who don't know about Civic Dialogues, we began during fall of 2020 in the beginning stages of the pandemic. And this was really part of a Bringing Theory to Practice grant that was taking place between Cerritos College, College of the Canyons, Cal State Dominguez Hills, and Cal State Northridge. And at that time, we had hoped to have an in-person training, but unfortunately, because of COVID, we ended up having to think of something very different. And we created this series, a virtual series, a speaker series, with the hope to foster a greater understanding of civic learning and democratic engagement. What we thought would probably last for one semester is now going into its fifth semester. So we are very excited to continue this process and to allow you to meet some of the most distinguished and amazing folks in the world of civic engagement. Today's presentation is comprised of two parts. We have our guest speaker who will present during the first hour, and then for the second hour, if you're able to continue to stay with us, Kimberly and I will continue on to discuss a deep dive, looking at some of the topics from Dr. Thomas's presentation that most resonated with you. When we look at our guiding frameworks, we are trying to advance an understanding of the intersection between equity, agency, and civic engagement to promote the public good. We are recognizing civic, community, and democratic engagement as a high impact practice and how it's connected to guided pathways. And we're also trying to leverage participants' current knowledge to build capacity to innovate for local and global change. And with that, it is our great honor to welcome Dr. Nancy Thomas today. And I'm going to take just a moment to read her bio so you'll know the kinds of work and the kinds of interests that she has. Dr. Nancy Thomas directs the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education at Tufts University. She launched nearly 10 years ago. IDHE is what's called an applied research center, meaning their research informs learning and practice. IDHE has 5 areas of research: college student voting, campus climates for political learning and participation. In other words, what's in the water at that place, political discussion, classroom teaching methods around matters of public concern, and higher education's role in a democracy in question. In case you haven't made this connection, Dr. Thomas designed and launched InSolve, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. InSolve reports tell us how many of our students voted, which breaks down by demographics like age and gender and field of study. She also has a long history of studying discussion, free speech, and inclusion on campuses. Her passion, besides skiing and kayaking, includes her kids and is around higher education's role in reinventing democracy to be more inclusive, equitable, and just. She holds a doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and as a loyal Midwesterner, a law degree from Case Western Reserve University. And with that, it is our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Nancy Thomas.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. I'm very excited to be here. I've worked with bringing theory to practice for a very long time. If I told you how long, I'd be disclosing my age, so I might not do that. But it has been around for a long time, and it's a really great program, and I'm glad that you all were able to get a grant. It started out really working with liberal arts colleges. And so the fact that bringing theory to practice is now working with community colleges and state universities is really great. So I am Nancy Thomas. I direct something called the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education. And if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Patty already went through what are 5 areas of research, but I thought I would pause on them for a second so that you know that when we open it up for questions, you can ask me anything. Ask about voting or political learning, equity, and democracy. Those are our big areas. We have a very robust grant from the Lumina Foundation right now studying what's an aspirational form of democracy look like now, and what do we need to do to educate for the democracy we want, not the one we have. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and I'm pointing this out to you because I think it's important to your work and it's important to mine. If you're going to run anything that has the word democracy in it, you have to say, that's a pretty amorphous term. What are we talking about? And in my office, because we study democracy, it's really important that my team know what that looks like. And so we have something that we called sort of a framework for democracy that guides us. It's that point on the horizon where we're steering the ship. I don't expect you to memorize this or anything like that, but I just wanted you to know that it's really important to have an idea of what you're talking about if you're educating for democracy. And that's not the same thing as educating for voting. Okay, we'll come back to voting. Voting is a means to an end in my mind, in the same way that service learning, and even deliberation and dialogue are. All of those are learning experiences that students can have, and institutional practices that little microcosms of democracy should be employing, that lead us to the democracy we want. And it is participatory and representative, equitable and inclusive. You will have all these slides, so you do not need to write all this down. Educated and informed, and so forth. Okay, next slide. So this is a weird year, 2022. I'm wondering if anybody is worried about it at all. So I'm going to give you a second to think about the question on this slide, which is, what challenges do you see for the 2020 election? And then put into the chat either a short term or a phrase, not something long, because we don't have time to go through them all. But what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of the challenges that you all are facing, and we'll come back to them at the end of this conversation. So I'll just give you an example. One of the challenges that I am facing is that things are very ugly for faculty. They are often afraid to teach political issues. They don't understand the role of neutrality and what is being demanded of them, not necessarily in California, but in other states around the country. So I'm very worried about academic freedom. So take a minute to put those in there. I like these so far. Transparency, that's a great one. And by the way, if you're wondering where I am, because it looks like I'm in the middle of a movie set or something, I'm actually on vacation in New Hampshire and at the rafters of a little cabin. And we're having one of these days that's going from pouring rain to sunshine to pouring rain. And so the lighting keeps changing. So if I'm going in and out, it's because I have a skylight right here and it's changing my colors. Okay. Yeah, erosion of human rights and services. These are great. So as we go through this talk, feel free to enter more of the challenges that you are facing or you think others will face in this election. Okay, next slide. All right, so one of the things that my office did is we invented NSolve. NSolve it's the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. And it's a very unusual study in higher education. And it's actually the only objective measure of student participation in public life that higher education has. We launched this study in 2013 by taking enrollment records that every single campus in the nation submits to an organization called the National Student Clearinghouse. Your campus does this. A lot of people think, I don't want to get involved in NSolve. It's a survey. It's going to take too long. No, that's not what it is. You have already given us the data we need. The National Student Clearinghouse, which is this repository of enrollment records, then matches the enrollment records with voting records. And that gives us information at the student level about voting. Now, what the clearinghouse also does is they de-identify the records and they send them to us without any names whatsoever. So we don't know who your students are. And frankly, we don't ever want to know who your students are. When we launched this study, I had been told many times over, this is not possible. It's not going to work. Don't bother. And we figured out a way to do it. And I thought, well, we'll get a couple hundred really nice little campuses that might play with us and give us data. And that is not what happened. After about, I would say about 2016, after the presidential election, NSolve hit a tipping point. And we now are working with 1,200 colleges and universities. We have a data set of more than 10 million students for each of the election years. We provide you all with a report that contains 2012, 14, 16, 18, 20, and soon coming to a report near you, 2022 data. And I'll go through these reports with you so you can see what they're all about. But what we have now is a data set that is to die for research. And what you get are these amazing reports. The service is free. I'm going to keep it as free as I can for as long as I can. It's a very expensive project to run. And not enough of the community colleges or state colleges or universities in California are in the study. So if you really want to know how you compare with your peers or how you compare with yourself in past years, you need to sign up for this. To sign up, you go to your president. There's an authorization form. We can get it to you. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is a recap, and I'm doing this so that if you talk to your lawyers, you can show them this slide, because what always happens is this study gets locked, it gets tied up in the law office where lawyers say, wait a minute, student records, they're highly protected. Why would we give them to anybody? You're already giving them. Okay, so they go to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse brings in voting data. In our case, we use a company called L2. They have the best voter file for our purposes. Then it's de-identified, it comes to us, we add all sorts of other data sets, particularly IPEDS, which is the federal government's sort of aggregate data on institutions. And then we do the numbers and send them back to you. If you were to sign up right now for the 2022 election, you would get a report from us probably around August of next year. And the reason for that is the voter files need to be certified. We will not work with drafts. And as you know, there have been many accusations that the elections were, fraudulent. And so everybody's dotting their I's and crossing their T's and making sure that the certified version of the voting records for that state are indeed accurate. That means time, and that means we have to wait. And it takes us about 3 to 4 months to turn it around. So patience is unfortunately built into this process, but we will do our best to get you your numbers as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some of the national data. And this, as I said, it comes from our data set of 10 in some years, 11 million college and university students for each election year. And as I say, we do aggregate level national data. So what happened in 2020 was really quite remarkable. College students voted at a rate of 66%. Now, 66% is only 1 percentage point shy of the national average. So all Americans turned out at 67%, and college students turned out at 66%. So that's pretty stunning, and it is an increase of about 14 percentage points since the last presidential election in 2020, let's see, that was 2020, 2016. We also provide you with two other numbers that we think are critically important. One is registration rates, how many of your students are registered. And then the third one is what percent of those who are registered actually go on to vote. And we are the ones who have been sounding the alarm bells on that last number, because too many registered students do not then turn out to vote. And the numbers are very, very low in past elections. 80% is a big improvement and probably accounts for the change in voting rate. Registration rates, registration is everybody talks about registration. There's so much focus on it. Your students are mostly registered by the time they come to college, because they register and get they get their driver's licenses, and then they register to vote. So generally speaking, about 75% of college students, even new college students, are registered to vote. Yes, you want to focus on this. Of course, you want to get your numbers up, but it isn't the number where all of your energies should be going. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're coming up on a midterm. Midterms are not the federal elections. Midterms are really low turnout, even for all Americans. So for all Americans over the past, let's say 10 to 15 federal elections, about 62% voted in presidential elections, and about 41% vote in midterm elections. That's a bad number, right? We should get more Americans to vote during midterm elections. But here's the thing. In 2014, when we launched this study, of the undergraduate population age, which is typically 18 to 25, that one age group, only 13% turned out to vote. Okay, so I'll say that again. Barely more than 1 in 10. You know, you'd be in a room with 10 people and look around, and one of you is a voter. That's what happened in 2014. Absolutely shocking. But to my own shock and awe, I don't think anybody paid attention. We sent out all these numbers. I don't think anybody paid attention. And then what happened was Donald Trump was elected, and all of a sudden, campuses were shocked. They were absolutely shocked. We weren't shocked, but they were shocked. And they all of a sudden said, wait a minute, what just happened here? Don't we have an old voting report from some organization, who knows where? And they dug out their voting reports, and they saw these low numbers for 2014. And they said, oh my goodness, we have been asleep at the switch. And I know this is a case because I happen to come across one campus. I'll explain to you how we got this data, but I had one campus where the STEM students, the science, technology, education, engineering, and math students were voting at higher rates than the social sciences. That doesn't happen anywhere. That's very rare. And I was so curious to find out what was happening on that campus that I called up the institutional research office and said, hi, I'm Nancy Thomas. We'd like to come out and do a study on your campus. We're really curious to find out why your voting rates for your STEM students are higher than those of your social scientists. The institutional researcher said to me, who are you? Yes, I sent you your voting report. Our voting report? I sent it to her again and she said, oh, this. I threw it out. I deleted it. I said, you deleted it? Our hard work, I was crushed. And she said, yeah, these numbers are so low, they can't possibly be true. And we heard this from campus after campus after campus. We don't trust these numbers. They couldn't possibly be true. Our students are better. And guess what? I hate to break it to you. They're not. So pay attention to these because these are very accurate. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to walk you through a couple of the data elements in a campus report, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. This is the cover. Then we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this is what I was talking about earlier, that we give you voting rates, registration rates, and yield rates, and we do it registration first, yield second. That's the percent of registered students who actually turned out, and then we give you a voting rate. We also compare you with the national averages. Those are those little those little notches, the triangle, red triangles there. That's the national average. So you can see at this campus, they're voting at lower than the national averages. We also compare you with the last relevant election, and we remind you of the national number. So every single campus that participates in NSOLVE gets a page just like this. And then attached to it are between 12 and 18 other pages. So if we could get to the next page. Okay. We also give you your raw numbers, and we do that in the hope that you will take a look at them and make sure they're accurate, because if they aren't accurate, it's because you're not submitting them to the clearinghouse. So we actually are very transparent about how we came up with this number, and we give you the raw data. We also take a look at vote method. Now, this one's a little tricky because only half of the states in the nation provide vote method data. I think more and more they're doing it. But if you've got students who are voting in another state that doesn't collect the data, then we don't have it for that student. And by the way, our voter data is national. And we find the students from out of state or even across state who may not have voted local to the college or university. Okay, next slide. So this is one of the most important data points that we give you. I am quoted often to say, I don't actually care that much about voting. I care about who votes. I do care about voting. Of course I do. But if we are voting at rates that are going to perpetuate inequality and sustain unequal conditions in this country, then we're not doing anybody any favors. So it's really important that your campus provide to the clearinghouse demographic data on your students so that we can give you data like this. And as you can see, these are broken down by demographic groups of students. And once again, we give you past data, we give you national averages, and we give you your voting rates. And so you can actually identify the equity gaps in your voters and target them for the next election. Once again, we give you your raw numbers. We have campuses call us up and they say, this can't be right. This is not the number of students that we have that are in this racial category. And we say, then you've got to fix the data. I want to ask you a question, and I wondered if you could put some things into the chat once again. All right. And what I really want to know is, what are some of your most effective strategies for either leveraging your voting reports, or for those of you who don't have it, for mobilizing voters? Okay, so what are some of your most effective strategies? Just jot down a few ideas, because I'm going to talk to you about what our research shows, and you can line that up with your own practices on your campus. So what are some of the best things you think you're doing during the election season? An on-campus polling place, that's a really good one. We think that makes a big difference. Faculty, thank you. Really important. Candidate forums, good. Oh, voting extra credit for voter sticker or a report about voting. Okay, we may have to come back to that one. Faculty across disciplines. I missed a couple of those in here. I'm going to try and pull up my chat and see if I can get it.
Nancy, let us know if you'd like us to read these.
I think that would be great.
Okay, so assignments related to voting extra credit, encouraging student organizations, sending out information about voting from the California Secretary of State's office, get out the vote and registration events, film screening, discuss policies that affect the discipline, campus as voting center, and then faculty from different disciplines talking about the upcoming elections, voter registration drives.
Great. These are all very good and very standard to the industry. I'm glad to hear that they are going on your campus. Next slide, please. So we decided that what we wanted to know is what's in the water on these campuses that have very high voting rates. And so we used a modeling process, a statistical model, to identify the predictors of voting. So what's a predictor of voting? It means it's something that correlates with turnout. So for example, women voted higher rates than men. States with mail-in vote ballots have higher voting rates than those that do not. Institutions that are in battleground states or have a very hot ballot initiative or a really high contest, highly visible contest, they have higher voting rates. So it's not fair to compare your campus with others across the country because you can't compare. And one of the big the most significant indicators of voting, predictors of voting, is actually affluence. So if you serve a less than affluent population, your voting rates are going to be lower than those campuses that serve a higher and more affluent population. So when you have these comparisons, what's happening, I'm afraid, is that the comparisons are rewarding the campuses that serve affluent white women, frankly, and also Black women. Black women vote at the highest rate of all students in the country. People are often surprised to hear that, but that has been consistent. I think they've slipped a little behind white women, very little in 2020, but they are the most engaged voters on a college campus. So that helps some campuses, but it doesn't help campuses that don't have a high population of Black women. So what we then did is for each campus, we calculated a voting rate based on what we might predict that campus to have and compared it with their actual voting rate. And we found a handful of campuses that were voting at rates that were so much higher than predicted. We wanted to go find out why that was, what was going on there, okay? So though we call these our campus climate studies, I will send in a team of 5 people. We do interviews, we do focus groups, we collect background data, we do all sorts of stuff. And then we look at what's going on there. Next slide, please. So we expected, as I suspect all of you might, we expected to find a robust level of participation around the elections, you know, a lot of registration efforts, a buzz, everything. We expected all the things that you all put in the chat to be in there, except we didn't look at polling locations at that time. We've looked at that since. And we were stunned. So we visited 8 campuses, and of the 8 campuses with crazy high voting rates, 4 of them met us at the door and said, we don't know why you're here. We don't do anything around elections. We had this nice little code book, which you create for qualitative research, and you code all the little statements that people give. And it had things like how many registration tables were in the student union. We had to throw out the entire code book. And when we did that, all of the codes started emerging from the data. And this slide reflects what we found. So I'm going to go through this, and then we can always come back to these things. So first of all, these were campuses with high levels of social cohesion and a sense of shared responsibility between students, with students and faculty, and with the administration, students and faculty. And by shared responsibility, I mean, they cared about each other. They cared about each other's future, success in class, well-being. One campus had adopted a program. It's actually a national program for suicide prevention called Are You OK? And they had adopted and expanded it. And they had these little comment bubbles that said R.U.O.K. And it was like a comment bubble. And it was stamped above every doorknob and on the backs of bathroom stalls. And it had a web link. And what it was for is if you knew somebody who wasn't okay, you called that hotline and you let the university know. And then the university would very discreetly and carefully make sure that student is okay. It was a stunning program, enormously successful. We talked to students who said, you know, we're in class, we talk about abortion. That guy doesn't want abortion. I do. We have these sharp disagreements. It sounds like we hate each other. And when we leave the classroom, we're still friends because I share responsibility for him and he does for me. It was ingrained in the norms of the institution. Same with the faculty. The faculty truly cared about the personal lives. And this is very relevant to state universities and community colleges because your students have lives. You know, they have families and jobs and they need flexibility. They need a caring faculty member. And your faculty members are teaching at these schools because they care. All right. So this social cohesion and shared responsibility, I cannot say enough about it. Also, diversity and equity were very well ingrained into these schools. Now, diversity, believe it or not, compositional diversity does increase voting rates. So the more diverse a campus is, the higher the voting rate. But what this really refers to is that people have this sense of shared responsibility and social cohesion across differences of race, differences of ideology, and differences of lived experiences. All right, so the next one, pervasive political discussions. That's got a star, and the reason it has a star is it was our #1 finding. And it was our #1 finding threefold. These campuses talked politics. They talked politics everywhere. They talked in the student union. They talked in the classroom. They talked in special setup circumstances. It was incredible where political discussions took place everywhere. And I'll give you one example. We visited a campus that had a chemistry club, and the chemistry club had a blood drive twice a year. They managed the blood drive. And at one point, somebody complained and said, my blood is diseased and I can't donate. And I feel outed. I feel embarrassed. This program is making me feel uncomfortable. And instead of tossing the program, the chemistry club studied the arts of dialogue and facilitation and hosted campus-wide conversations on the efficacy and value of blood drives, and also how to make sure that they were inclusive, even if people can't give blood. And that was facilitated and created by the chemistry club. You would not think that at most campuses. Student activism and leadership is very important. Student activists vote at 3 times. No, sorry, wrong. That's local voting. Activists vote at 2 times the rate of non-activists. Okay, so what you want to do is when you set up your registration tables, don't say, come over here and vote. Don't ask that question. Don't say, come register. Ask them, what do you care about? What's happening in this election? What's your issue? How involved are you? What's at stake? Do you know which candidates support your issue? And get people involved in issue activism or at least knowledge. and train your students in the arts of collaborative leadership and discussion-based leadership, going back to pervasive political discussions. I'll tell you one other really amazing story. I could tell stories forever, I know, and that's, you can ask me if you want more stories. But we visited one campus where I went into a focus group, and it was a student leaders focus group. And most of the students were wearing business attire. The men were in suits and ties, or at least jackets and ties, and the women were wearing business attire too. And I said naively, "Oh, you didn't need to dress up for me." And they said, "Oh, we didn't dress up for you. We do this every day." And I said, "You do this every day? Why?" And they said, "Well, you just never know when there's going to be a photo op." And I said, okay, you got to rewind here. I don't understand what's going on. And they said that they have, that the student government is the facilitator of activism and political discussions on campus. And that what they do is they have a center for public deliberation, a little office that teaches it. All of the student government people go through the training in dialogue. They also control the funding for student clubs, and no leader of a student club can get funding unless they too are trained in the arts of dialogue and collaborative leadership. They then take this student government and they divide them in half, and one half is responsible for the politicians in the state, and the other half is responsible for the media. And what they do is they have everybody connected on social media, all the students, and then they watch for opportunities. So one was when Nelson Mandela was dying, they decided to buy hundreds and hundreds of candles, and they texted everybody and they said, "Come to the main area and join a vigil for Nelson Mandela." They then, some of the student government folks were on the phone to the media and said, "Come take photos of our vigil for Nelson Mandela. The politicians are going to be there." And the others were on the phone to the politicians saying, "Come hold a candle. There will be a photo op because the media will be there." So this is what students can do if they are leaders, if they are activists. And then finally, having fun around elections is definitely a thing. And we did see some campuses that were really good, and they had parades to the place where you vote or to register. They had parties, they had battles of the bands, they had things like that, and those do get the word out. So I'm not gonna minimize that, but the number one finding was around pervasive political discussions. I think what I'm going to do is skip a few slides because I want to get to a couple of other things. So if you could go down to, let's see what number it was. Bear with me one sec. Okay. Well, just go to 18, which is the one that says election imperatives. Yeah, we'll go to that. So what we've done is we have published all of our recommendations based on our qualitative studies, and we just have completed our 25th qualitative study. And so I'm hoping I don't have to do too many of those in the near future. They're very, very hard to do. They take a lot of time. But you can get all of our recommendations in election imperatives, and we have two versions of it. We have a 2019 version, and then we have a 2020 version. And the reason we put out 2020 is because we wanted to make recommendations that were around the circumstances of the 2020 election. And those, of course, were social distancing and a lot of activism around race. Following the George Floyd murder. So those were conditions. And so this document, the 2020 version of election imperatives, gives you recommendations, and they are for each constituency. So we have an equity checklist in there, and then we have something for institutional leaders, 2 pages for faculty, and 2 pages for students and voter coalitions, and the ones that are actually doing voter mobilization work. And so that's on our website. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to give you these slides and they'll have some of these specific things, but let's fast forward down to, I'll tell you when to stop. We also have on our website a discussion guide, and the discussion guide, you can download it, it's free, and it's for discussing your NSOLV reports on campus. And we just recently did a survey of our NSOLV, our 1,200 NSOLV campuses, and found out that it's one of their favorite resources from us. I was very surprised. So keep going. Yeah, okay, so go back up to the resources one. Just one up. Yeah, so this is an example of all the materials on our website. And there's the link. I think somebody put in the chat, how do I find all this stuff? We also have FAQs on the website about NSOLV, about how to join, what the facts and answers are about it. You can there's one on FERPA, which is the privacy law that protects student records. You can give that to your campus lawyers if they're griping, which, trust me, they gripe. Not my favorite thing to do, but I talk to a lot of them.
Dr. Thomas, I know you have taken way more time, and we are so grateful that you took this extra time to ask or answer these questions. And my only comment to you is, we're going to figure out a way to get you back and make sure that we make up for this time that you gave us today. So I just want to say this has been absolutely wonderful, and thank you so very, very much for being here today. And for those of you who want to stay on,
welcome.
We'll talk a little bit.
Let me just say one thing. If anybody needs to follow up with me, I am an open door, nancy.thomas@tufts.edu, but you have to call me Nancy. All of you.
Yeah, she's made that very apparent, even though it's hard for me to call you Nancy, but thank you very, very much. This has been just a wonderful presentation. And thank you so much for taking time, and please go enjoy the rest of your vacation.
Will do.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.
Everybody, good luck with this work. It's not easy. It's a labor of love, but you can do it.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.